Welcome back to Bills and Business, the show where we explore the intersection of policy and technology. I'm your host, Laura Davis, co-founder of USLege, and today we're joined by someone I know really well, Senator Angela Paxton. She represents around 1 million people in Senate District 8 in the state of Texas, and she's not just a leader on issues like education, protection of children, and innovation, she's also my former boss. She's got a background as an educator and has a deep interest in how technology is shaping our future. She's uniquely positioned to share her wisdom today. We're catching her in the middle of a special legislative session in Texas, so we're especially grateful she's taking time to talk with us. Enjoy the show. When did you start teaching, or did you take a break at all but when you were with the little ones?
So, I majored in mathematical science, computer science. I went back to school, got my master's in education, and then got certified to teach.
Right.
And then I started teaching kind of right off the bat then, before we had kids or anything. Ken finished law school. We moved back to Texas. And then I was back to teaching. And then we got pregnant with Tucker, our oldest. And I finished out that school year and then stayed home with the kids.
Okay.
And so we actually homeschooled up until kind of middle elementary. With him, and then he went back to school, and then the next one went back to school. I was homeschooling the little ones, and then when the youngest one got to second grade, I think, I went back to teach. So so Tucker was 14. So I guess I kind of took a 14-year break from, I guess, professional teaching, but I kept teaching at home with my kids. So It's been actually an interesting background for what I do legislatively now, because I'm, as an educator, right, and a school counselor, I taught and also was a parent in all of those settings, in a private school setting, in a homeschool setting, and in public schools.
Oh, yeah.
So I get how different things work for different families and different kids in different families, and sometimes at different points in life, right? And so, what I love about Texas is no matter what you're after, you can find it here. And I think we've done a lot of great things to help make our public schools better, to help give homeschool families the support that they need, and better options. And now with school choice, giving more families the opportunity to do private schools if they're interested in that. Of course, charter schools are kind of in that sort of a hybrid, right, between public and private as far as experience goes. But of course, it's so much more affordable then for a family. But it's going to really equalize things. And I think it's a great example of a rising tide lifts all boats.
Sure.
And it's going to be great for families. It's going to be great for kids' student achievement. And that means, since children are literally the future, that means a better Texas and a better future Texas.
Well, I think you're so uniquely positioned with your background, like you said, to handle education issues, having literally taught in every single type of education space. And then specifically with protecting children online, which is what we got to work together on, which was some of my favorite work I've ever done. What initially kind of got you excited to help in that space and even know that that was a space that was needed? Things have changed a lot with technology over the years. So when did you start to realize that kind of online safety for children was important?
Well, I think it started when I was kind of in that break of being home with my kids between my having taught, being home with kids, and then I went back to teaching. During that time when I was home with my kids and homeschooling, the internet had come in. Mm-hmm. And so, I remember seeing things as the internet was kind of, everybody was figuring it out, right? And I remember realizing, I remember my son, when he was 10 years old, calling from the other room and going, Mom. And I remember walking into the room where we had a little, desktop computer, a lot bigger and bulkier than the kind of things that we all have now. Now we have these things in our pockets, right?
Yeah.
But it was in the office. It was where I could see things. He and a friend were playing, and I walked in, and his friend had said, "Hey, type this." And he did, and there were pictures just scrolling, and he couldn't make it stop, and he called to me. Now, that was eye-opening to me on many, many levels. But you know, the average age of first exposure for children to porn for quite some time has been around the age of 10. He was 10.
Oh, wow.
Which was way too early.
I feel like it's getting earlier though.
Well,
with
it
phones
is. In
and
the
access.
last 3 years, I have seen studies that indicate that the age has dropped to 8 as the average age of first exposure. And you know what that means? The average means that there are kids younger than that are seeing porn for the first time. And of course, you know, porn is just one element of the landscape of this digital jungle that kids really are growing up in today. And just like the real jungles don't naturally grow fences or guardrails or warning signs. And so that's why I think all of this is so important. So I had an awareness of it as a parent.
Okay.
When I was teaching, I was watching all of this kind of evolve in the classroom. And then, of course, I moved into a position as a guidance counselor. And I was constantly working with the teachers about how we use this in good ways and not bad ways, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater regarding technology in the classroom. But I was also dealing with parents and kids, and social media came in during that period of time. So I had a lot of awareness just from real life. So when I came into the legislature and some of these ideas started popping up, like what can we do about this? And parents were coming to me and saying, you know what, there need to be some legal frameworks around some of these things. You know, we would love, in a perfect world, everyone self-regulates.
Right.
In fact, our form of government is built on the concept of self-governance, right? Mm-hmm. At the individual level, that each of us is operating in a way that has integrity, that exhibits moral leadership, right? Mm-hmm. But we also know that whenever you have a lot of people, whenever you have a lot of kids, things are going to go wrong. People are going to make bad choices. Sometimes they make bad choices by accident. Sometimes they do it very deliberately. But we need to pay attention to this as legislators. And the reason is because our kids are counting on us to do that, like we do in the real world all the time.
And kids can't self-govern the way that an adult can. So that's what I, learned so much about with you was the brain science behind what pornography actually does to the brain. Because at first it's kind of like a moral piece here. Like everybody knows that children seeing pornography is wrong. I think most people agree with that.
Right.
But when you actually go into the brain science of, it's bad for adults for their brain, but obviously that's their individual choice over 18. But when you look at what it does to the child's development and all of that, and, we were in a time where we didn't have access to this. I was about 16 before we had a desktop computer at home and had suspicions that my brother was looking at bad things as the older sister. And it turns out he wasn't. I think I told you this silly story before, but I had told my parents, he's doing bad stuff on that computer. You got to watch him. And my mom went into his computer one day and went into the photo folder. And there were 1,000 pictures labeled cats in a cat. And she went, Laura, you got to leave the room. I don't know what's in here. She opens it and it's thousands of pictures of kittens. So I'm sorry, Ryan. Sorry I'm blowing your bubble
sorry
there.
I doubted
your
you,
bubble
right?
there. Hilarious. And sorry I doubted you, but to this day I still get him cat stuff. But it shows that we were aware of things like that. But at that time, it was still images. It wasn't the same as now we're knowing, which is, there's communication in these different portals online leading to trafficking and grooming. And but really specifically what it does to the human brain to see all the supernatural stimulus that they never would have gotten in any existing reality.
Exactly.
That could never happen.
That's exactly right. And you know, to your point of these were just still images, or even if they're videos, movies, right? Now what we're talking about are things that adapt to your preferences.
Yeah.
And so, you bring up the brain science, which I think is an important thing for people to pay attention to. And we have the ability, we know a lot more about the brain than we ever have. And we understand a lot more about how the brain develops, particularly with children. And so one of the things that we know from looking at how addiction is treated in adults, whether it's an addictive behavior like porn use, if it is an addictive substance like an illegal drug or alcohol or tobacco, these things are addictive in different ways, but addiction is addiction to the brain. Addiction work has a mechanism, and what happens is a novel stimulus triggers a release of dopamine, and it turns out, a lot of experts will say it this way: what you're really addicted to isn't the substance or the behavior. What you're really addicted to is the dopamine hit. And so for different people, that has different flavors. But what it does is it rewires the brain. And so folks that treat adults with addictions, there are ways to kind of go back to, like, rewire the rewiring so that you can kind of get back to what was normal, right? When you talk about a child's brain is in the process of wiring. So what's happening with a child when they are exposed to things that are addictive algorithms, which is common and probably typical. These things are addictive by design. So what you're ending up with is these kids don't even get to start out with a normal brain. So before they ever hit, kind of adulthood, they have been wired differently. And that brings up a lot of interesting implications as far as treatment goes, because what do you do then? You're not getting back to normal. This was never normal for them. And there's a lot there that you can kind of go on and on forever with, but it really does matter for a child's future that we do the things so they can have a healthy upbringing, right? And they can develop healthy emotional habits, mental habits, physical habits, spiritual habits. All of those things matter for a kid to have a healthy future. And so, yes, it really does matter that we take care of kids. We've always known that, and there are a lot of things we do in, the physical world. And some of the legislation that I've carried has kind of been around that direction, that, something like age gating, for example, or age verification. A couple of bills that I've carried are in that direction. And, you and I've worked on some of those together, and we've certainly talked about a lot of them together. But the idea that in the real world, a kid can't buy age-restricted products, things we have as a society have decided this is not good for kids, this is not healthy for kids, for whatever reason. Alcohol, tobacco, just as starters, pornography, right? A kid can't go in. It used to be it was a magazine, right? It was a physical product, but you had to show an ID, and the person at the cash register had to check that ID, verify, and if they didn't do that, or they ignored what the age was on the ID, there were consequences for the vendor, right?
Sure.
So these are kids have always had fake IDs and that kind of stuff. We know that, but that's a separate problem. For the vast majority, this really does go a long way in preventing kids from being exposed to harmful substances or behaviors. So in the real world, we do that, and people know it works. It creates transparency and it creates accountability. And those two things, the thing about transparency is most of us, whether you're an adult or whether you're a little kid, most of us act better when we know people are watching, right?
Sure.
Even a little kid knows that. So transparency goes a long way to helping us all learn how to self-govern, right? And we do have to teach kids how to self-govern. That's why these things are important. They help us give our kids ways to do that. But a lot of this legislation that I've worked on has just extended those kinds of protections into the digital space. So House Bill 1181, which went all the way to the Supreme Court.
That was our bill.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I am very excited that passed and was flying success and was found that it was absolutely true and upheld. I hear you were actually there in the Supreme Court that day. How was that?
It was really interesting, to get to be in the room for oral arguments around a Supreme Court case is
amazing.
It's an amazing experience, and it's
For your bill.
Yeah, for your own bill.
That's crazy.
So one of the things that I felt was very encouraging as I was there is all 9 justices, and the justices kind of run the gamut from more liberal to more conservative.
Sure.
Some of them you never know exactly where they're going to land, but as I was listening to their questions of both parties, counsel of both parties, state of Texas, and then what was it? It was some kind of free speech kind of a thing that represents the porn industry. Okay, and we're talking about for kids.
That's the thing. It's
For
under
kids.
18. And this was passed completely almost unanimously. I think there was only one vote in the House that was against it, and it was completely bipartisan.
Yes.
So I think that's really the main industry that would be opposing it.
Right. And so the Free Speech Coalition, I think that was the party. So anyway, that was their argument, was this was restricting free speech, and that I guess that requiring age verification would have a chilling effect on adults using this. And of course the argument is we already do this if you went to buy physical pornography, which I guess most people don't do anymore, but that was all there was for a long time. Did that have a chilling effect? Well, maybe maybe somebody doesn't want to go in and say, I want to buy this, but it doesn't prevent them from doing what they want to do. Now, I will tell you, one of the things about online pornography, about addiction in general, they talk about the 3 A's of addiction. Accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. So those 3 things together really do push things toward being more addictive in their nature, right? And so, no doubt it was true that anonymity, I would imagine, has an allure with regard to online porn, right? No one knows.
I think of a phone immediately when I think of that. That's all those things. Everybody has a phone.
Yep.
Most people in the country.
Including kids.
Kids have phones now, so it's very easily accessible. And you're anonymous when you're online and you're searching for things.
Or you think you are anyway.
We're definitely not. We can go into that too. The data privacy side is still...
That's a whole other thing.
Oh yeah,
right?
they're tracking.
But with all of that said, the argument was this is infringing on adults,
Sure.
right? But the argument of the state of Texas was this is a common sense, time-tested approach in the physical world for protecting kids from this very type of content, which has been demonstrated to be harmful to them. It's defined in Texas law as harmful material.
Right.
That's what it's called. Pornography is called harmful material because it is harmful for kids. So anyway, listening to the justices ask questions of both sets of attorneys there, you could tell that everybody was pretty on board with, it makes sense to protect kids. The question is the mechanism for doing it, right? And so, I felt good about that the concept of the law was going to be upheld, but, were they going to let it be age verification? So, of course, I guess it was in June, the ruling came down, and we were really pleased. They upheld the case. The other thing that's important about that is when the Supreme Court rules on any issue, if they support it, it encourages more of that from the states.
Right.
Right. If they shut it down, then it has a chilling effect, right, on that same kind of legislation from the states. So that was one of the things that was really, I think, in a deeper way than just the specific law that was upheld there. I think that's really important is because it indicated from the Supreme Court that they recognize that states have a responsibility and a duty to protect kids, and that this makes sense.
And there's so many parents that I met with, constituents of yours that, and around the country and the state, that were coming in and saying, this happened to my kid and I never expected it. And I think it's the parents that aren't necessarily watching or don't even know about it. So it's kind of protecting those people. But one thing that really got me when I was watching all the news around it was that it was really focused on the age verification piece, which is great, and this model legislation now. But the piece that, was unique that you added was the warning sign that the pornography sites should disclose. I think there's a lot of people who don't know the damage it's doing, even as an adult, and having that medical health warning and an option to click a link for addiction. That's like a free option to help that I think just makes a lot of sense to know, maybe it is bad. They have that on gambling sites. They have that on cigarettes, on smoking, like having a warning to alert people. I think that was a really unique way of adding that piece.
Well, and I don't know if you remember, but, you were working in my office when we came up with the idea. I think you're the one that maybe even found the legislation from it was built around a law that had been passed in Louisiana. And I remember, we had talked as an office about, I just told everyone on staff, if you see anything, if you have ideas or we come across things that will help protect kids online, I want to know about them. And you brought this idea to me and I'm like, that is a great idea. We should do this. And so we started moving in that direction. But we also talked about what would make it better. And part of what we felt like would make the law even more effective than the age verification piece of it was a health warning, because this material is addictive. So to put a health warning on the websites, that the porn sites, in addition to requiring age verification to enter the portal, that they would also display that warning, and an addiction hotline, right? So for help, because we also know that lots and lots of people who are using porn secretly, they hate themselves for it.
Sure.
They're hiding it. They don't want anyone to know, and they can't stop because they're addicted. And so it would also maybe give someone a way out, somewhere to go. Unfortunately, the court had struck that part, both of those parts, out. So that was not included in the Supreme Court decision because it wasn't part of the law that went to the Supreme Court. That's a place that we have continued to talk, though, in my office about finding a way to get back to that, because it's part of this bill is about stopping certain kinds of things from happening, kids accessing this kind of material, but we also want to do something to help people who are struggling, who want to make a difference. So, that's something we haven't quit on. And we've had multiple conversations, even with, the government relations folks over in the lawyers in the AG's office, who were very instrumental in this particular case being at the Supreme Court. So we're still working on how we can go in that direction, because it's not enough to stop the bad. You have to help support the good.
For sure. So what other things have you been working on from this last legislative session that are in this space now, because you're really a figurehead in area of protecting kids.
Well, you mentioned a minute ago, Laura, about how a lot of parents are just kind of not aware.
Right.
In my opinion, as a school counselor, as I was working with parents, one of the things I saw all the time, parents would come to me and they're like, we don't know what to do about this or this or this, right? And part of the reason they were coming to me was I was the counselor at the school, but I was also a parent. And for the most part, my kids were now older than most of the parents that I was working with. So, that kind of gave me a sort of a platform to speak to them as just person to person, mom to mom, about, this is something lots of kids go through. You might not know that with your oldest child, right?
Sure.
You might just think, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. And it might be something that's actually really common or whatever. So I could kind of talk about things from that standpoint. But a lot of what I was talking to parents about were things that none of us had been parented through ourselves. Mm-hmm. So you don't always even know what to look for. I think most parents now realize there's a lot out there and I don't know what all of it is, right? So I think one of the important things that we did this last session was legislation to make sure that parents are put in a place where they really legally become the gatekeepers of their children's digital operations. And that was in the form of the App Store Accountability Act. It's a great bill. What it basically requires is that before a minor can download an app or purchase an app, their parents have to give consent. All right. So that's the bill in a nutshell. I think it's a very powerful tool for parents, because now any decision that their kid is making is going to have to come through them, right? So the app stores already know, they know how old every user is. When you set up a new phone, a new device, an iPad or a laptop or whatever, all of the things that you have to go in and create the account, it's there, your age, right? And so they know whether the user is a minor or an adult. And, it makes sense to do this at the App Store level, not the individual developer level. Doing it at the App Store level creates more continuity and uniformity in the way things are done. It requires age ratings and descriptions of the apps so that parents can read, what does this app do?
Are the apps doing that yet? Or
that's a great question. Some have already been proactively doing that. And in fact, it was interesting. Some of the tech companies that were opposed to the bill came and said, we don't need a law to do this. We're already doing this.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, though, there was also testimony from lots and lots of parents and users of different apps that came in and said, yeah, some of these developers do provide this kind of information, but what we realized was that a lot of the descriptions were incredibly misleading, and the age ratings were in some cases just downright false, inappropriate. There were examples of parents who came in and talked about things that they went in and they were just, they're being responsible for their kids, and they would go in and kind of peruse and see what kind of things were on their phones or on their tablets, and they would find, this app was 12 and it was, designated for 12 and under, and it had a description about, you can make cartoons and stuff like that, and they go into it, and the 12 and under included nude depictions and things like that. I think most people would say, and certainly most parents would say, that they don't want 12 and under. They don't consider nude images appropriate for 12 and under.
Sure.
So what this is going to do, going back to those kind of two pieces of transparency and accountability, the App Store Accountability Act is going to give parents like a direct line of sight into what their kids are doing, and they get to decide if that's good for their kid or not. And if they say yes, and then they realize that this app has been deceptive in its description or inaccurate in its description, they have the ability to, through the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, to hold these developers and app stores accountable.
The thing that stood out to me with the App Store Accountability Act, of somebody that had, I think it was one of the very many stakeholders that I was chatting with through the years when I was working with you. And they said something that was really crazy with an app, that was, some apps have communication mechanisms where you can have strangers contact your kid. And it's happening more and more on like very innocent seeming games. So do you think there's even something that people can do other than just warn parents and educate them on what's going on? Because how do you stop a chat room in a game? And that seems where, children are getting groomed and trafficked. Right. Is there anything that can be done on a legislative level for that?
Well, I think that, we're figuring a lot of this out in real time, right? Because the technology is evolving in real time. So
yes,
one of the things that, even with the age verification bill that now has, survived and thrived through Supreme Court scrutiny, there are platforms that kids can go to be coached on how to circumvent age verification.
Sure.
So,
sure.
As soon as you fix one thing, bad actors figure out a way to lure kids back, right? To lure kids back. So, as you were talking about, an innocent seeming application, a game or something like that, where these evil people are grooming children and exploiting children, and that happens in the real world too. And if you think about this, it is one of the reasons that you have pedophiles and sex offenders who haven't gotten caught yet, that embed themselves in places where, they're predators, and they go where the hunting is. They go where there is prey. And, I remember this when my kids were little. We would go to Chuck E. Cheese, meet a friend. I'd meet a friend at Chuck E. Cheese. Kids would all play. And I remember from time to time, you would kind of notice someone that was there, and it's like, why is a grown man by himself at Chuck E. Cheese on a Thursday at lunch? That doesn't make sense, does it? And, I usually would keep an eye on someone like that, right? But it happens in the digital space as well. And so, I do know this. We can pass laws all day long, but if we don't equip and educate parents, they really are the first and the last line of defense for their own children. And it's why it's so important that as legislators, we always make sure that parents have all the tools, and that we're not keeping parents from having tools that they need. Because at the end of the day, again, in a country that's founded on self-governance, in a family, that looks like parents looking out for their kids and doing their best to be aware and to do the things that they need to do, which is incredibly challenging. I think about it every day because now I have 6 little grandkids, right, that are 4 and under. And, my kids are 26 to 32. They weren't parented through a lot of these things, right? They kind of were just a little bit older than all of this stuff kind of coming in, right? And so a lot of it, they've kind of had to figure out themselves. And, I'm proud of my kids. My kids have pretty good North Stars, but, we all make mistakes, and all you can really do is learn from a mistake. But there are some mistakes that are really hard to come back from. For example, if you've got, now we're talking about chatbots that develop intimate relationships and are designed to create emotional dependency. Well, that's one thing when it's an adult, but that's another thing when it's a kid. And there are already reports, numerous reports of these kinds of things resulting in a suicide. And parents find after the fact that this is the result of technology that their kid was using. And
Wow.
so I think one of the principles we always have to remember, because you can't make a rule for everything. As soon as you make, if it's all
Sure.
about rules, then someone will find a way around the rules. I think it's why we have to be thinking in terms of principles. And I think 3 of those principles are transparency and accountability and parental consent.
I think the transparency piece really sticks to me for how I know Eric and I have talked about what we'll do with our kids and how we'll handle things. And I think having an open dialogue with the kids is probably the most important thing, because there's going to be things that come up as technology evolves, like you said, that are completely new that we've never faced. We don't know some of the new slang and the new words out there. We're like so behind. So of course we're not going to know about some of these apps and things, and even just new technology that will come out. But just having an open dialogue conversation where they can talk to you and say, hey, this is happening, and not be ashamed of it, I think is so big, because you are hearing about suicides and the mental health issues with especially young girls and social media. There's so many issues, and I think everybody's aware of it, but having a conversation, making it public, talking about it with parents and in schools, and allowing the kids to just say something is wrong here and talk to you about it, I think is probably the best thing people can do.
It's really important, and it's not easy. It's not easy, but I think that's important, that what you're talking about as far as open dialogue and relationship with your children. It's important in so many ways, but for purposes of what we're talking about, I think in particularly 2 ways. One is that, number one, you need to have a real relationship with your child so that your child knows the difference between a real relationship and a counterfeit or unhealthy relationship. You need to have a healthy relationship with your child for that reason, right? But the second is, you do have to, and this is really hard. It is really hard. Because, as parents, we are tasked with teaching our kids right and wrong. And part of that is accountability when they make bad choices, right? But you really do have to think about how to navigate that in a healthy way. And not all of us had that modeled for us. So,
Sure.
I'm thankful that there are a lot of resources for parents on this topic, which is really not about technology. It's about relationships, but it applies everywhere. Again, back to principles, right? But, when I was a school counselor, I used to do a quarterly meeting for moms, and we would talk about different parenting topics. And I remember addressing this in particular, and I said, you do want to teach your kids to learn from their mistakes, right? And everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has failures. And if you're an adult, you know this. Really, the things you have learned the best, you probably learned because you screwed up,
Sure.
right? It's our mistakes that we really go, whoa, and then we stop, maybe, right?
Hopefully.
You either gloss over it and then you don't learn from your mistakes at all. But the best growth really probably comes from what you did wrong and figuring out, I want to do better than that in the future. I'm not going to cover it up. I'm not going to ignore it. I want to be better, right? And if we don't foster an environment in our families where kids can say, Mom, Dad, I messed up. I remember saying to parents, I think everyone here would want your child to come to you if something really bad happened, right? I'll give you an example. A lady that I know told me the story of, and this is technology related, her son had gotten into a chat room and there was a period of time where this relationship developed. And at least his understanding was this was a girl. Okay. And so, they were kind of becoming friends. And then he was kind of like, I think she likes me, and, things go on. Well, it gets to a point where she needed money. She needed him to send her money. Mm-hmm. This is a common internet scam that takes many, many, many versions, right? But so was this even a girl? Probably not. It probably was not in any way, shape, or form a teenage girl that he thought it was. But it got to a point where they needed money, or someone was going to hurt them, okay? And the boy was like, I don't have any money. And he didn't have access to whatever it was, $400, $500 or whatever. And then he basically had, I don't know how to help. And then the person was saying, they're going to kill me or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, this kid, instead of like kind of locking down and like going somewhere to try to address this, which was a scam, he actually went to his parents and he said, I don't know what to do. Here's what's happening. And it was embarrassing for him to do it because he had gone this far. But his parents were able to help him navigate it, right? But that only happened because they had a relationship that already was in existence where he could go and say, I've gotten myself into a bad situation here. So the reality is all of us would want our kids to come to us if they were in a situation where they'd gotten themselves in a bad spot and something bad was going to happen, or, whatever. But, this is what I was telling the moms. But if your kid can't come home with a C, or forget their lunch, or not remember their uniform for basketball practice after school, if they can't come to you with those kinds of things without you having a nuclear explosion in your head,
right?
What are the odds that they're going to come to you when they really have a problem?
Absolutely.
That they're embarrassed about. And so, it's not easy. It is not an easy thing, but it's so important for those two reasons, I think, among many others. But, kids need to have healthy relationships in their families first. That helps them have healthy relationships in other places, because then they know what it's like, right? They know how to ask for forgiveness. They know how to forgive. They know how to say, I did this. And the shame is not there because they're dealing with it, right? They're dealing with it. So there's that. And then I think it really does matter that we always have parents as the gatekeepers when it comes to technology. We recognize that almost everywhere else.
Well, that was a great point about the scams. There's so many new, really sophisticated scams coming out with similar voices. And we're going through, our SOC 2 compliance audit right now, which is very in-depth. And so we've all gone through security training. And now any email I get, I'm like, this is scam. This is a scam. This is a scam, because they just want you to click one button. They have all your passwords, all your information, all the company's bank info.
Well, and,
crazy.
And you have to be taught that.
Right.
Somebody has to tell you that, because it's not intuitively obvious.
No.
They know, again, the neuroscience. I've talked to parents about this before as well. You may not really understand the neuroscience behind these algorithms that are sucking your kids in to scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and interacting with people that are not good people, or that are not even people now, right? They're chatbots or whatever. You may not understand the neuroscience behind that, but these tech companies do. And they weaponize it to suck your kids in. Kids are a very desirable economic demographic. Sure. They're a huge consumer pool. And one of the things that makes them so desirable as a consumer pool is that almost all of kids' spending is completely discretionary, right?
Yeah.
I have to compete for, if I want you to spend money on something that I have, right? I have to compete with, you got a car payment and a house payment and, all of these things, right? I don't have to compete with any of that with a kid. Do they want it or not, right? If they want it, then, a lot of them have parents that are like, sure, whatever, that's fine. And they don't know that when they click and buy that, not only are they buying something, but they're giving all kinds of data, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff they're not getting compensated for. They're creating a footprint where they can be tracked. And, whether it's getting a kid addicted to compulsive spending or it's getting a kid addicted to pornography, when you get a kid addicted to these behaviors online and get them sucked in and connected, you've got a customer for life.
Yep. Well, you can see it so easily as an adult. Like there's podcasts I listen to a lot, and a lot of the ads I've noticed, oh, I use that vitamin. Was that just inception into my brain? Because I keep hearing it all the time that this is the one to use, or this is the supplement of choice. It's fascinating seeing how that works on you, but I'm aware of it. Children are just not. And if they're seeing this kind of content to consume and that's what they want, they see other kids happy doing it, then they're going to want to do it too. They're more susceptible. What types of technology are you now seeing? I know you meet with so many people all the time that are telling you most up to date and technologically advanced things with AI and maybe, things we should look out for on the horizon. Are there any examples of new risks or technologies that are out there right now?
Well, I think, AI is definitely the new frontier, right? And again, I'll go back to something I said earlier. We really want to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. AI has tremendous opportunities for human flourishing, right?
Totally.
And for families as well, right? I mean, to the extent that we can kind of outsource certain kinds of menial tasks or really complicated computational tasks and all kinds of different things. It's an unbelievable search engine, right? One of my kids I know, they've started using AI for when the kids look like they're kind of sick like this. Mm-hmm. And they'll just, they'll Google. People have been doing this, right, for a long time. And, you have to be aware of your limitations, right? Mm-hmm. You're not a doctor. But all of us have gone online and done a search on, a symptom or something like that. And it's a lot better at that.
And the Aura Ring, I got a new one.
Yep.
It's so good.
Well, and it gives
data.
us a lot of things that, metrics that we can use to improve our health and those kinds of things, right? So all of these things are great things, but there is a dark side that is also there. And so we just can't stick our head in the sand, turn a blind eye to the perils, even as we do want to really take advantage of the great opportunities. And, I know in the school space for quite some time, there have been teachers have been having to deal with new kinds of cheating, right? Plagiarism, just outsourcing your homework, basically. And what does that do to a kid? Well, they're getting the grade better than ever, and they're not learning anything, right? They're missing out on the actual learning. And so, those are some of the ways that we see it turning up in schools. But I think, a lot of the things, I think the chatbots are one of the things I'm really concerned about. I mentioned earlier, these are designed to create emotional dependence. There's an article I read recently that said, from a chatbot, you will get empathy, but you're not going to get help. Mm. And again, this is not an actual relationship. I think that we've, everybody talks about the mental health crisis, and having someone to talk to is really important. But I would just say someone, not something, right? And a child is not able to distinguish between what's on the other side of that. A lot of adults aren't either.
I do think that that's where it can get very dangerous, where the lines are blurred of this is not a real human, and having people who are not leaving the house and having relationships in that way. It's just bad for society and the population, to be frank, too, when you have that type of thing. You did mention a lot of the positives of AI. I'm just curious how you're using it now in a positive way, like in your life, how it's changed over the last year, because it's everywhere.
It is everywhere. I imagine there are ways I'm using it that I don't even realize that's depending on AI, right? Yeah. I do have to give a shameless plug for you guys, though, because we are definitely using your product in our office.
Thank you.
And
you guys have been great stakeholders.
It has. Well, I know when we first started exploring it, I was like, you know what? I want to know what my staff say about this. And I asked them to test drive, and they were like, this is amazing. It saves us hours and hours and hours of work. And, I was a math teacher. So I remember, as calculators have kind of evolved, right? And I haven't seen the calculator, whatever the latest calculator they're using in high schools and that sort of thing. But I know when I went back into teaching after my kids all got school age, the calculators were a lot more sophisticated than when I had been in school and when I'd been teaching, before the internet had come in and all of that kind of stuff. So, and I remember the arguments around even just using a calculator versus doing it on pen and paper, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so, even then, this has always been kind of the yin and yang of technology, right? Is you want to make sure, again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So on the one hand, you need kids to know how to multiply and divide and add and subtract. They need to be able to do those things manually, because if they don't know how to do those things manually, they don't know how to really, when they're using a calculator to do those things, and they get a really stupid answer because they miskeyed something, right?
Sure.
Well, if you know how to do those things manually because your brain understands the concepts and the skills, then you catch those mistakes, right? You're like, oh, that's way out of range. I must have hit the wrong key or something like that. If you don't know the underlying principles, then you don't catch those things, right?
Yep.
But if you do, then the calculator does all the time-consuming number crunching that allows you to go do much more complex problem solving, right? And so I think that's the same idea with AI, is that you need to understand the basic principles of how things work, how people work, those kinds of things. But when you and have critical thinking skills, right? Does that sound right? Does that make sense? Is that logical? Just because someone says something doesn't mean it's true.
Sure.
And so, you need to know how to do your own research when you need to. And, you need to know how to ask good questions. So those kinds of things will never go out of style. And they'll never really be something that you can actually outsource safely, I think, without losing your agency. And I think that's kind of at the center of all of this, is that, we want to maintain what it means to be human.
Oh, 100%. That's kind of the philosophy I have with our company. So it's that I was doing so many manual, time-consuming tasks in my workflow. And if I can cut that down by hours, but really it's just a bunch of clicks on a computer, I can spend more time doing this and having meaningful conversations and, moving the needle, having, opportunities in new states and being able to travel and go and meet these people in person, I think is so awesome, and getting people's time back. And so we're using it a ton in different ways. And I'm always trying to think of how can I use AI to optimize things that I don't like doing? Like, how can I save myself hours?
Right.
And we just had a really fun event. We had a hackathon. So we had all the team come together. We've got 18 staff now. It's insane.
That's amazing. Congratulations, by the way.
Crazy. Thank you. It's so crazy, but I love our team. And we had, all the developers, everybody in person. We put them all into groups mixed with like the business guys and marketing team and all that with the coders. And we said, okay, come up with the most efficient tool or technology that you develop that we can use in the business that's going to help save us a lot of time. There's so many things that are time consuming. And one of the most innovative ones was actually one that James's team built, who you just met. They built, so we get feature requests all the time from Laura, from everyone, from everybody who uses the product.
From the end users, right?
Yes. And then that's how it helps us develop the product. But we have like huge fights and debates about what's next to be built. Because we're like, no, I talked to this person and they really want this. So we've developed, there's a little chat bot that you can like answer the question, you can send questions to, and then talk to a person. But James developed an AI that would aggregate all of the requests, put them into one, and then the highest ranked feature was at the top. Like, this has been requested by 20 different people. This has been requested by 10. And say, hey, this is where you should start next. This is the most interesting thing. I thought that was an amazing new use of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
That's amazing. Well, and even I talked about, I know my kids use it a lot as well. And actually I have one of my kids, my son is in the tech industry.
Yes.
And because he just loves this kind of stuff, he actually has incorporated it into his apartment. So he's built all of this stuff using AI where, he gets home and he's like, initiate a welcome home protocol, and all of these things happen, in his apartment. The curtains do this, the lights do this, the air does this. And so, I think there's tremendous opportunity and tremendous creativity, right? That is the potential of all of this. And I think we just have to pay attention to making sure, though, that we're not doing our beta testing on kids.
Couldn't agree with you more. There's such a polarization divide right now with different schools, right? We're in the Texas Triangle, so we're in some of the, high-tech areas of Texas. If we're raising our kids here, they can stay here. But there's a lot of places in rural Texas that they might not be learning about some of this technology and might be behind, So I was curious what you think about incorporating, teaching about AI so that, they're not behind when they get to that graduate level and there's somebody who's way ahead, who's been in Austin or Plano or lived in a more tech forward area. What do you think is important that they learn about?
That's a great question. And again, is something that is not only always has been constantly evolving, but will continue to constantly evolve, right? And so I think that it's something that we just have to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in technology and make sure that we include it in the curriculum in our schools. One of the good things is that we tell our schools, you need to study this, you need to teach this, 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 and this, right? And so we've done a lot around not just the college readiness, but also the career readiness, military readiness. For success doesn't look like college for every kid.
Sure.
The trades and I mean, kids can make a good living doing a lot of things and never go to college. And it's just not the right fit for everyone. In fact, I think colleges are going to have to really pay attention to what is happening, because I think degrees in some ways are becoming less central to a person's ability to do tasks. And, I think about, again, I mentioned my son that is super techie and lives out in the Bay Area. He's been doing this for a long time now. But, when he has switched jobs or anything like that, they kind of screen his resume, but they don't hire based on his resume. They bring him in, and he's a coder. So they bring him in and they say, here's a problem, program a solution, code a solution in this language. And he can either do that or he can't do that. And they don't care what his degree is in. I know, I had talked to him at one point because he's in the Bay Area. I'm like, what do you think about doing like a master's at Stanford or something while you're out there, or an MBA or something? And he's like, why would I do that? my work experience is more valuable than any degree I could ever get. And doing the degree would take away from the work experience.
And cost money.
And cost money. And so, I think that is what the future is looking more and more like for our young people. They can go online and learn anything they want to learn. And they may be able to learn it in a format that works better for them, is more workable for their schedule. I mean, this is one of the exciting things about where we are for adult learners. Folks that are wanting to improve their adults, they have families, they can't quit their job and stop putting food on the table so that they can go get another degree or do something like that. But because of all of the online opportunities, they can learn new things as they continue to do what they're doing now, but improve their situation, improve their earning power, and that sort of thing. So I think those are a lot of the things that we have to think about from an education policy standpoint in Texas. And I think it's great. I mean, one of the most important things, I loved, this is one of the things that I think was important that I took from homeschooling my kids, was teaching my kids that you can learn your whole life long, and finding the things that you're really interested in, you can follow that, right? And you can navigate and set your course for what you want to learn, what you want to know, what you want to be. So, that's almost limitless now.
It's really exciting. And I know I never got taught personal finance in school. I never got taught about business. Even my friends who've gone and had MBAs, they're saying, okay, you have more experience in this than I do because you've literally started a business. And
Right.
I had to listen to a really good podcast the other day. It was with, I can't remember his name, but Tony Robbins, one of his business partners. And he started multiple businesses and been very successful. And it was a similar situation to what you were saying with Tucker not wanting to go get his MBA or another degree when it's unnecessary and it's work experience. This man said his daughter wanted to be an interior designer. And they said, okay, well, you're going to go to college for 4 years and have no real world experience and have to go find a job. He said, here's what I want to do. I'm going to propose. I will pay for you fully for 2 years. But what you need to do is direct message on Instagram your absolute favorite designer in the world and say, I will work for you for free for 2 years. And he said, and I will do that. I will pay for your life and you can live with me and I will pay for everything for 2 years. And then I will help start your own business. And what would that do? That would be amazing. 20 years old, have work experience from the best in the world, and would be cheaper than college. And I thought, wow, what an innovative, interesting way to look at, new opportunities now. So I think obviously there's doctors and lawyers and positions that you need to go and get a degree that are absolutely required. But there's so much that could be self-taught or you could learn, from doing.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
Yeah. That really is true. And I think that, the world is, the world is my oyster for the person that understands how to teach themselves and how to go out and find what they need to know, right? The self-directed learner. I guess maybe that's the term I was trying to find again. Self-directed learner. That's a big theme for a lot of folks at homeschool, that they're teaching their kids that, right? And I think that's important. That goes back to also some of those core principles about just learning how to be a self-governing person, right? And making good decisions. All of those things are important. And it matters that parents are the ones that are kind of helping their kids navigate those pathways as they grow up.
So as a former educator and counselor and seeing all this new tech and what parents are dealing with now, what types of things would you recommend they do to keep kids, able to share with them and out of some of these dangerous situations?
I've thought a lot about those kinds of things, and I'm thinking about it, as I watch my kids raise their little ones, right? And my oldest grandchild is 4.5 now, and I just got my 6th one.
That's amazing! Congratulations!
But they're all
That's
little
awesome.
bitty, and I look at them, and I will tell you, as a grandmother, the thing that makes me happiest when I watch my kids and my grandkids is that I look at my grandkids, they're happy. And why are they happy? I think they're happy because they feel safe. They don't know that they couldn't be safe. That doesn't mean they don't fall off the bed and hurt themselves or drop, fall off their bike and skin their knee or whatever. I mean, things happen, or their brother hits on them, or what. I mean, things happen, right? But for the most part, they're operating out of safety and security and love, right?
Sure.
Not all kids get that, and I realize that. So it's just a gift to be able to watch my babies, my little ones, growing up in an environment like that. But even so, I think my kids are doing a great job parenting. But even with that, all of the best intentions, there are going to be things that happen that are less than desirable. And so you always have to be prepared for those things. But I kind of made this little list for myself, if you don't mind me looking at.
Yeah, I love that.
But
Okay.
but one of the things I've thought about is when one of the most likely ways for a kid to die, and a minor to die, an adolescent to die, is in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of different reasons, right? But most of us don't say, my kid's not ever going to be behind the wheel of a car, right? Most of us do our very best to teach our kids to drive. We teach them to be responsible. We teach them, you don't drink and get behind the wheel of a car. You don't get in a car with someone who's been drinking. You don't drive at 2 a.m. when the rest of the people that are on the road probably have been drinking. I mean, there are things we teach our kids so they can do this dangerous thing that also has a lot of upside for them in a safe way, in a responsible way, right?
Right.
So I think, to me, that's an analogy for what we have to think about when we're teaching our kids about technology. Tremendous opportunity, tremendous upsides, but also some dark sides and things they've got to think about. And we also have to teach them to think well about things that don't exist yet, right? So some of the things that I think it's important for parents to remember is, number one, pay attention to your kids' tech use, qualitatively and quantitatively. It is not healthy for your kid to be on their device all the time. Laura, we didn't talk about this, but one of the laws that just went into effect in Texas is no cell phones at schools.
Right.
And
Yeah, we didn't talk about
I
that.
have heard reports from administrators and teachers that for the first time in years, when they walk in the cafeteria, they hear laughter. And kids are bringing board games to lunch.
Wow.
And they're talking, and they're playing, and they're learning each other's names, things like that. They're building real relationships. They used to be sitting on their phones, no one really was exactly sure how this would play out. Would there be like this mass rebellion or whatever, because I have to have my phone, but the reality is that we're getting back to a better, I think a better social normal with our kids by getting these out of, they take the place of something. They're not just an add-on. They're replacing real relationships. And so I think that's something parents really need to pay attention to. Their kids, the types of things they're using, think parental consent. Even if there is something that involves your kid that doesn't legally require parental consent, you want to. You're the parent, right? You're the parent. So that would be one thing. Another thing that, I think kind of started, I remember it kind of starting when I was a parent of young kids myself, but it's really easy to use tech as a babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we've kind of talked about is, you wouldn't hire a stranger to come babysit your kid. You need to understand that using tech to babysit your kid is not safe. You don't know what's going to come in. So don't use tech as a babysitter. It could be a pedophile.
Yeah.
And that's that's literally true. And so as easy as it is to just hand them the device, you can do better, right? I mean, even playing music or something like that, right? I mean, there's a lot of benefits to kids' brains listening to good music and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of educational music. I mean, there are other things you can do. Go outside and play. You know, there's a lot you can do other than using tech as a babysitter. And it really is not a safe bet for a babysitter.
Totally.
Model good character and good decision making for your kids. Teach them that. You teach them how to make good decisions. You teach them what is good and what is not good. And you know, like I've heard it said, you know, character is more often caught than taught. So you do need to say it to your kids, but you need to model it. They catch from you your life. And it's such an opportunity, and it's one of the best ways you can influence your kids. It's a real legacy. You know, just the life you live is the best thing you can give your kids. Make it the best. I talked a lot about this, but, you know, really focus on having genuinely healthy relationships in your family and with your kids. Learn how to say, I'm sorry. Learn how to have boundaries. Learn how to have a healthy no, and how to have a healthy yes. You know, I remember a lady taught me a long time ago, a lady that went to my church that was a real role model for me as a mom. But she said, you know, you get asked to do things all the time, and a lot of the moms that might be listening, or dads of kids, but you know, if you're the kind of person that likes to get things done, people will notice that and they'll ask you to do things. And I mean, wouldn't you ask a person that's good at getting things done to get things done?
Right.
And they're the busiest people. And a lot of times we can, out of guilt, we just keep saying yes and yes and yes. And I remember a dear lady who's had such a powerful impact on my life. She said, Angela, don't ever forget that every yes is a no and every no is a yes. Because when you say yes to something, you cannot change the fact that now you'll have to say no to other things. And it may be to your kids or your husband or your close friends or your, you know, other things that really, it should be your priority. So when you say yes to something, say yes on purpose, not out of guilt, because it's what you should do, right? And every time you say no to something, you're also saying yes to other things. So you can't, it's not so easy like, oh, I said yes and then I get rid of the guilt. When you said yes, you said no to other things. So don't be afraid to say no when it's the healthy thing to do, right?
That's great advice. I'm trying to do it more because you can't do everything.
No, you
can't.
And
especially as a mom, you have other responsibilities. So
you do. You have a lot of things you have to do. And I guess, you know, the other thing, and we talked about this too, but be a parent who your child can come to when they failed. And they still know you love them. And even though you don't approve of the behavior and the decision or whatever, you're gonna walk with them into the healthiest next step, and that they can count on you for that. So, you know, I think it is probably harder to parent today than it ever has been. But kids have always been in the crosshairs as kind of the low-hanging fruit for people who want to exploit. You know, there have always been predators in the jungle. And, you know, as parents, though, we're the grown-ups. So be the parent and love your kid. Be their safe place where they can come. Have standards. They can do it, and they'll want to do it, you know, if you're modeling that for them, and love them when they make mistakes.
That was amazing. Wise words of wisdom here. And thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about all these things. I know you're one of the funnest people to sit down and talk to. I always would see people come in, you know, from different companies and groups, and they always would say, wow, she's so fun to talk to, and she knows so much about so many different subjects. And I think this was a really great peek into all the wisdom you have today. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, you're a fun person to talk to too. And,
Thanks.
and I love watching you operate in your element here, and just wish you the best success. And I think you're right where you're supposed to be. And it's fun to watch you just get better and better and better at being you.
You're so kind. Now, how can people keep up with everything that you're doing? I know you have a newsletter and some other things. Do you have any other shout outs?
Yeah, they can
People to
follow me on social media, Angela Paxton TX, on my social media, and angelapaxton.com is my website. People can go there and sign up for the newsletter and everything. But I'd love to have people join us. Another thing I'm working on right now is I'm actually working on a documentary podcast project myself.
Cool.
Aimed at parents and helping to equip and educate parents so that they can raise their kids in this really difficult environment that is often, predatory for their children. And it's called The Cost of Innocence.
Okay.
How big tech, big pharma, and big others are targeting our kids for profit. So I know a lot of parents are becoming more and more aware of how many forces there are that are looking at their kids as just a money machine, and don't really care what happens to the kid. The kid is expendable. It's just a way to make some money in the short term. And so, again, parents are the ones who are invested in their children for the long run. And so I think it's really, really important that parents are engaged. And so I want to help educate parents, encourage them, but equip them with practical tools so that they can make good decisions as parents to help their kids make good decisions as they grow up.
Amazing. And when and where can people find The Cost of Innocence?
Well, they can actually go online and, just do a search on Cost of Innocence, Angela Paxton. But we're in the process right now of production, and we're still doing interviews and that sort of thing. But it's going to be a great podcast. Again, really hoping to help parents have what they need to raise their kids.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to watch it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.